Best practices for managing configurations. First, we'll look at adding a new field. The first thing you want to do when you're adding a field is to really think about what type of field you want to add. What are you planning to use it for? Are users going to enter data into it? What data are they going to enter into it? Is it going to be a calculated field? Do you want to be able to search and report on it easily? And what I mean by that is you need to be able to match the field type to what you want to do. So, for example, if you want to be able to easily filter or report on data in a field, you're probably going to want to use a drop-down as opposed to a text field that people can type anything into. Some people might type USA, some people might type United States, and then you're going to have disparate data that's more difficult to search and report on. Also, if you're thinking about doing calculations on a value, you'd want to use an integer or a currency. So you can add or subtract or average those numbers, whether that's in a calculated field or in a report, a summation report. Text fields are nice because they can be searched in global search. In addition, when you're adding a text field, you're going to want to make sure you think about how long the data is that you're entering. If you have a text field for, let's say, a custom quote number, that quote number you know is never going to be more than 8 characters long. Maybe you want to give yourself a little extra so you could make it 16, allow up to 16 characters. But you don't want to add 10 text fields that are 255 characters long. That's the default, because then you're wasting thousands of characters on your table. And the database tables can fill up, so if you add too many fields, you won't be able to add any more fields after that. Another one that I see quite frequently is people choosing the wrong date versus date time. If you don't care about the time on a date, you make sure you're selecting date versus date time. Date is a lot easier to enter data into, it's a lot easier to report on, it's a lot easier to group by in reporting, and it's a lot easier to filter on. But if you need the time, then go ahead and use a date time field and make sure you're filling that out appropriately. And again, you can use calculated fields, so you can concatenate other fields together. You can even pull data from a related module down to, let's say, a child record. And you can have dependent fields where maybe you have an opportunity when you mark it as closed won. You have 2 fields that pop up, one for reason lost or reason won, and another one for who won it. Did you win it or one of your competitors win it? And you can start tracking that data. But you do want to be somewhat careful with those because you can get giant layouts with fields popping up all over that may or may not be easy to find when you're trying to save them. Also, if you are using calculated fields, you can, like I said, pull data from a parent record down to a child record. And if you start cascading those down multiple levels, for example, you may have a contact field that's based on a parent account field and then a case field that's based on that contacts field. You really are going 3 levels there. And at that point, if you edit the account, it has to cascade all of those changes down to the related contacts, which then have to cascade down to all of the related cases. And you can quickly exponentially grow that calculation and cause performance issues or even cause that recalculation to fail. So do be careful when you have calculated fields based on calculated fields. When you're modifying a drop-down for an existing drop-down that may have a lot of data in it, you want to make sure, especially if you're removing a value, that you go ahead and search that field for any of those values that you are removing. Because once you remove the value from the drop-down, Sugar is going to pretend that data in the database doesn't exist. So if you're replacing a value, you would want to go into your drop-down, add the new value, go to your entity, search the field for your old value, do a mass update to the new value, Then go back into your drop-down and remove the old value you wanted removed.
We also want to touch on some of the other field properties that are available when you're creating and editing fields. So one that comes up pretty frequently with people is whether or not they should require certain field values to be completed. And that's certainly a balancing act when you're looking at your CRM system. If you require too much information, what ends up happening is your users just kind of make something up to fill out the required field and move on with their day. And so you wind up getting some garbage data in there, especially if it's things that they legitimately, may not have on hand, that information. They may not know it, may not be able to look it up necessarily. On the other hand, if you don't have required fields, you may find that your users are leaving a lot of things blank and you're not collecting the data that you need. So like I said, it's certainly a balancing act. It's something that you can change over time. And sometimes there are other ways to make sure you're collecting the data that you need through data scoring or exception reporting or things like that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we look at data management. There's also a property within the fields for whether or not to enable the duplicate merge for that field. What that is referring to is when you merge duplicate records, you get that side-by-side view of the data in each field. And you can decide with this duplicate merge property whether or not to include this field in that view. So, think about whether or not you would take the time to compare the data that's in the field on the two records you're merging, and then make the appropriate decision whether or not to include that. If you include all of your fields in duplicate merging and you have a lot of custom fields, that duplicate merge page might get overwhelmingly large and become a little bit less useful to people. In version 8.0, Sugar added a new property called personal information. This is related to Sugar's data privacy features, so especially relevant to those who are working with people out of Europe and have to worry about GDPR and the European data privacy laws. But even if you're not working with people in Europe, this is still a setting that might be important to you or relevant to you. And this allows you to mark which fields contain personally identifiable information, and that will feed into the data privacy features that Sugar has built, including things like being able to see all of the personal information on file on a particular record, so that you get a particular view you can click from the drop-down menu on the edit button to see just that information about a record, and then you can copy and paste it or print it or something from there. It also feeds into the erase data process that's built into the data privacy module. So the fields that come up when you go to erase data are the fields that are flagged as personal information. And then finally, this is not actually a fields property, but it fit here better than anywhere else on our slides. So something else to think about when you're creating new fields or working with your fields is, should this field be on the list view? Should this field be a column that users can display on the list view of data in this module? You do have to be a little bit careful in terms of performance with the number of columns on your list view. Sugar has made quite a few performance improvements to the list view in general, and so this is less of a concern than it was maybe a year or two ago. But I would still say, put some thought into what columns or what fields are available as columns on your list view. Make sure that you're, including things that users need, but not including things that are not going to be used, essentially. Prioritize what's the most important information that people want to see on that view. There are also a number of different ways to manage how the data and the fields that you're creating are going to be available to use for searching. So as you hopefully all know, Sugar has different searching tools, global search and search filtering, as well as reports. And there are things you can do as an administrator to influence all three of those. So with global search, you have administrator settings, first of all, at a high level for which modules are being indexed for global search. That's not in Studio, unlike pretty much everything else in this section of our slides. That is in the search administrator tool. And so you can turn off searching for modules that you don't want users to be able to search through global search, modules you're not using probably for the most part. You can also, within Studio, select which fields are being indexed for the search engine. So you can control which fields are being searched when you do a global search. as well as what they call the boost value, which controls how the results are ranked. So when I type something into the search box in global search, how does Sugar decide which match comes first and which one comes second and third and so on? That's all based on the boost value. And so you can adjust the boost values to make certain things more or less important so that you are presenting the most important results back to your users first. One interesting thing here that I learned recently and that I hadn't really thought about is that if you're typing in a search term that matches multiple fields on a record, you're going to get a boost value from each field that it just adds up to get the overall boost value for that result. So we were searching for something, I think it was a company name, but it was a company name that happened to be in the email address domain as well. And so it was matching on the contact record both the account name field and the email address field, and therefore that result was coming up higher than the account record itself because it was combining the boost value of the email address and the account name versus just the account name. And the, sorry, I see there's a question here. Let me go ahead and, so if you want first name to be searchable for global search for leads, the question is if I want first name to be searchable for leads, you need to set that in the leads module. Yes, that would be set in the first name field in the leads module for the global search tool. That is a field that should be turned on for searching by default. So I'd be surprised if it's not already turned on unless someone disabled it for whatever reason. But yes, that would be where you would set that up. So global search settings are, again, in that search tool at a really high level for which modules are searched, and then within the field properties to turn on searching of individual fields and setting the boost values. The search filters, when you go within a module to create a search filter, that list of fields is controlled through a layout in Studio. So within every module in Studio, you have a search layout, and you can drag and drop fields onto your search layout so that they can be searched. So this actually is something that I try to think about when I create a new field. Fill out the field creation form, save the field, but then do I want it on a list view layout? Maybe not. Do I want it on the search layout? Probably so. Most of the time when I create a new field, that's something that I want users to be able to search by, and so I'm going to go ahead and add that to my search layout. And then finally, you can also control which fields are available for reporting. This comes up most often when you have fields that you're not using, whether you used them originally at some point and you've stopped using that field but it's still in your database, or maybe there's some standard fields in Sugar that you've chosen not to use and they're still coming up on the report screen, and that maybe is confusing people when they're building reports. You can hide fields from the report screen by unchecking the reportable property on the field. So this again is in the field settings. If you don't want the field to be available for reports, just uncheck the reportable field or property. All right, that's going to wrap up our managing configurations section. We're going to move into, did I skip something? You're yelling at me.
I think so.
Sorry. Oh, I did. I totally tried to skip Justin's slide. Sorry, Justin.
There is a difference between relationship and relate fields. Relationships are created in Studio by opening your module and going to the relationships section. Relate fields can be added by opening your module in Studio and clicking on the fields section. The differences are that when you create a relationship, you have the option to create a many-to-many relationship, which will put a subpanel on each of the modules you're linking together. A one-to-many relationship, which will put a field on one of the modules and a subpanel on the other module. Or a one-to-one relationship that will put a field on each of the modules. The most often relationship I create is one-to-many. So think accounts and their related contacts, or accounts and their related cases. That's a one-to-many relationship. So one of the primary differences when you're creating a relationship is that you're going to get either a field or a subpanel on both sides. If you just create a relate field, you won't get the other side of that relationship. And that can play in when you're looking at reporting, for example. If you want to report on a relate field, all you can pull in is the data in that relate field. So if you have a relate field on a case that points to a contact to say who the primary contact is for that case, you can just get that person's name. If you had built a specific relationship to say, this is the primary contact for this case, you could traverse through that relationship to get the contact's name and phone number in a report. You can also traverse through the relationship when you're doing calculated fields if you wanted to pull data into the case.